Well, my friends, I'm Rick, and this is your seat at the table, and I got Gray and White Mom over here off to my left. She's seriously thinking she's going to come over here and get in the way because she doesn't get as enough attention as she would like. We are looking at Dungeons and Dragons: Savage Species, the Playing Monstrous Characters Source Book. Now, I didn't have this when it first came out. I picked it up in the discount book bin at JCD and Hobby, I think about a year ago or so, and which is at some point the problem with a lot of these editions is that it becomes overwhelming. There's so many things that they keep cranking out. This was published in 2003, so this would have been for 3.0. We're getting in the last couple of years. Roughly 2005 is when they switched to 2 point or 3.5, and of course I'll still get comments every now and then. Well, that's just not 3.5 didn't come out till after 2005. Well, you know what? Okay, so it didn't. Guess what? It's still 3.0. Third edition, 3.5. It's the same edition. Get it through your brain. It's not a completely different system. They do that all the time. Every so many, this an edition runs for an average of a decade to 15 years, and you get toward the latter part of that 15 years, and suddenly they come out with what they hope will be the beginning of the next edition. Obviously, the 3.5 revisions were completely different from what turned out to be fourth edition. And like I said, I don't own very many fourth edition source books. I have none of the core books, but I did have an associate who did have like 10 of them. He had all the first 10 that came out because he bought them all at one go, and then ran a session. He ran a couple sessions and then said, "I don't want to be a GM anymore. You be the DM." And then he loaned me those 10 bucks, and I played and ran numerous sessions and campaigns over a 2 year window. We averaged every Saturday night or every Friday night, depending on the time of the year and the sporting events going on, and the availability we had of getting together. Uh, Someday, when I get brave enough, I'll explain that portion of my life, and I'm not keen on doing it, and I'm not proud of it. So, but it really is a missing component of who I am and why I am the way I am anymore. Anyway, so when we look at building your monster characters, monster classes, okay. At some point back in the day, there were so many cool monsters and humanoids, and people would go, well, I want to play that as a character. It's like, who would ever want to play a goblin? So it started with orcs and half orcs. So when you start getting into the half orc, half this, half that, you don't see too many half goblin, half halflings, that kind of stuff. I'm just saying though, is this became this idea that you could play these characters, and so as you develop over the editions, if you go from first edition to second edition, you'll start seeing. In first edition, there was almost no non-playable or characters or that you can pull up out of the monster manual and play. By second edition, we start seeing entries, some caveats or alternate, what you can do at your table to play some of these. And this is where things like the tiefling and of course the orc and the half orc came out of. If you go back to the original stuff, the very early days, halflings, dwarves, and elves were considered monsters. They were non-human. The humans were the base for everything. It was over time that the creators at D&D and other game systems came to understand that players want to play a variety of stuff, and that having the elf as a class by itself made no sense. So they adapted it to a race that you would then have multiple different options for classes. And you're familiar with all that. I don't have to step you through this. So I read this book, and I'll grant you this, the only time I read it was once, and I found it to be quite interesting. And so Savage Species is a comprehensive guide to monster characters that helps you use monsters as either player characters or as non-player characters to serve as interesting allies and opponents for your player characters in your campaign. You need the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual to use this book. The monster classes and templates in Savage Species are designed to be complement uh, compliant with the revised version of the Monster Manual, blah, blah, blah. So you got character creation, monster characters, monster classes, feats, equipment spells, prestige classes, and things like this. And so we had started adapting some of this. Many of the DMs that I associated with over the decades back then, we would take we would create NPCs using monsters as a great bad guy, a big bad, or a bunch of middle-level big bads that were associated with something else. And it was because we were looking at experimenting with a wide range of something other than the traditional trope that was always, the go-to. It's like the something other than so you all meet in a bar. That's how you all got together, was hanging out at a tavern because you're all alcoholics. I mean, it's thing. So choosing a base, monster characters, choosing a base creature, keeping in mind that creating some creatures are not really suitable to be role played. Others are. And then there are certain limitations. There will always be the player who wants to, I want to play a dragon. No, I mean, in my opinion, dragons are great. Unless you have a specifically designed campaign where everybody are dragons, and that's what it's a draconic based campaign. That's a mistake because dragons are extremely overpowered for any one-on-one character, and two, it's just it's a power play, it's a power trip. That's a player who wants to min max the max, the max, the max, and dragons their way of getting there because they lack the subtlety or the understanding or the desire to play a dragon to its full potential. That's not always the case. I did have one player some decades ago who did play a dragon character, and their way of arguing was that the dragon would remain in its humanoid form. So it took on this form that looked like it was kind of this cross between a lizard person and an elf kind of look to it. So there was some obvious thing going on there that it was not human or it wasn't elf. But the player also had this understanding that certain strengths are kept hidden for a reason, and I forget the motivation or what the deal was. I think they were being hunted down or something, and they were hiding. That was so they were being purposely measured by when they did use those advanced, the dragon's ability to revert to its dragon form and trash an entire cavern full of people, if, for example. And so you both have to be on board with it, and your player has to be reasonable, in my opinion. So, introductory monsters, the level adjustment factors, stuff like this. It's books like this that coin some of the terms of splat books, or not. Some people would say unnecessary, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I think there's a huge amount of useful information in here, both as if you want to play, if you're a player who wants to play a non-traditional character, this sort of stuff is right up that alley, and it's quite useful. And as for the GM, more importantly, I see things like this as a way to dial up or enhance the evil characters, your NPCs that your players are going to go up against. And so having, an ogre magi with a high intelligence and a extreme vengeance for retribution, that'd be a great bad guy. It's a regular Bond villain, in my opinion. So we get into things like advanced monsters. That's another thing. If you talk about playing in epic level games, and if you play enough epic level for a long enough period of time, many of the challenges, especially for the DM, is finding opponent foes that are going to be a real challenge for their epic level characters, because the epic level characters are walking in, they're almost walking in a god or goddess's shoes at this point, at 20 plus levels, and they can myrtleize just about, an average dragon ain't standing a chance against the party, that kind of stuff. Well, then this is where you can tap this to get really even more creative and even more depth to your foes. So we got monster classes. So we got examples: monster character, the Minotaur, the Giant, you know, feats. When monsters gain feats. Now, this I found interesting because, like I said, I'm a big fan of taking a lower level, lower hit die creatures and monsters and dialing them up to have them keep pace with the party. So it's the idea of the party, and I like I said, you really can't get the reactions out of a group of players who are jaded and experienced when, let's say, a trio of goblin, you know, epic level champions show up to take the players to task for something they did or didn't do. And the characters' expressions when that thing that they're used to just flicking their fingers at and kicking away tears their finger off and tries to shove it up their nose and almost succeeds. That really, really, in some cases, did succeed. And it really woke the group up like, what? That made normal goblins. And then, I'm like, yeah, says you. How do you know they're not normal goblins? By whose definition? You just didn't run, you just didn't get deep enough into the goblin world to find them till now, or they come looking for you because you've flicked them too many of you know, their little relatives around, so they didn't care for it. Feats are always wonderful additions, and there's a few feats. Every now and then, you'll get a player who's has a great idea for a character, and that character they want to have something that makes that character unique or special, or some kind of twist in the story develops that offers an opportunity for a unique feat. So that feat isn't part of the normal class for that character. Doesn't mean you at your table can't kit bash that feat into to be used. So that's where this sort of stuff can come into play. And of course, equipment for monsters. That's always a great thing because one of the downsides of I like the artwork because a visual really goes a long way to give you an idea of what we're looking at, and some of this stuff, if your players acquire it during the course of their adventures, like serpent armor. The serpent armor is a +3 leather armor that appears to be made from the skin of one or more big snakes. So just the unique appearance of the armor. Even though the fact is, it's a +3, but it's leather, it's still pretty damn stylish and unique. So if your player acquired something like that, they would definitely stand out in the crowd. And the more advanced your characters get, the more they want to more they may or may not want to stand out. It's a matter of perspective and things like this. It's always great. Another thing that I like about stuff like this is that I can tap this for other monsters because this is something that I try to tell early, would-be game masters to consider that after you've been running the show for a little while and you're beginning to grow a little confidence. Look at the character, the monsters like goblins, for example, and the traditional goblin comes with a spear or a short sword, that kind of stuff. But what if the goblins, these particular goblins are carrying, I don't know, draw crossbows, or they're using whip chains or something with something more not normal than what you're used to, and utilizing them to your advantage. So I have used chains over the years for like goblins and kobolds because chains are easily they could pick up from discarded by the dead foes that have tried to get to them in the past, or that they just got it in a raid. But they learn to use them like a vampire does, and you trip your opponents, you can bind them up, you can a number of different things, and to have a group of goblins hop, let's say some goblin sergeants jump out and start whipping chains at you and attempt to subdue you because they want to capture you to make you, to interrogate you and then later have you for dinner. Not literally have you for dinner. Take rings, wondrous items, always nice to have additional stuff. These are also nice little items you can pepper into the treasure hoards when you find them. So when somebody goes, oh, there's a set of pipes, and it turns out they're satyr pipes. Well, what are those? Well, maybe you need to go find out. Maybe you need to go find a sage or somebody that can give you some advice on them. But more importantly, do they have some value? Trying to find it. It's here because I'm right there. But okay, so we gotta go back. It's RS next. Huh? Render. Oh, there we go. Satire. Any creature with the appropriate panpipes, perform skill, can play these beautiful panpipes. In the hands of a satyr, however, these pipes can produce a particular performer's choice of three magical effects. When the pipes are played by all creatures within 60 feet, except satyrs, they must succeed on a will save or be affected by charm person. So by just playing them, you're risking your entire party being charmed. You know, creature successfully saves blah 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 blah. So the fact is, you can still pick something up as your regular character and utilize them is pretty slick. They're not going to get the full effect out of them if unless they were the satire. But you know, and I'm probably pronouncing the damn term wrong. Wizard spells and sorcerer spells. Once again, always some nice, interesting, uh, different stuff. Right? The lion's charge. Subject can charge and make a full attack in the same round. Wouldn't that be a nifty spell to have that you could cast on your tank or something at the last minute? Prestige classes, designing monster prestige classes. Because like I said, if you're going to go into prestige and epic level, you got to have prestige and epic level foes. And the fact that you have literally hundreds and hundreds of low level, low HD options for foes doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to dial them up to make them a challenge to your players. And in some ways, this is how we've expanded our monster manuals over the decades. Is because some creative player will say, "Well, what if? What if?" All right. So that's how we expand out and further. The first thing that kills me when I see these Ithids, whenever I see a lot of these artworks of the Ithids, they look so powerful and so physically powerful and so physically robust. But if you look at the descriptions of them, it doesn't suggest that. It doesn't suggest that. It actually suggests that there's somewhat of a fragile creature, right? But hey, each to their own. Masters of the Flies, right? Some exotic stuff. Scaled horror, right? Salad brood. I've used Celity a few times over the years. I had one campaign where they featured quite a bit in the early stages of the campaign, and I think the opponents it was because I'd read that Drizzt Do'Urden novel where he was dealing with something similar to one of these critters, and it got me thinking, well, let's do one of those too, right? Anyhow, so let's see. And of course, here comes this stupid thing that I do not want it to do. So I got to tell it to go away. Go away. Go away. Stop. Yeah, I'm damn positive I don't want you screwing my system. I never asked for it. I don't want you. I don't need an update driver BS thing popping up every time I turn the computer on. God, I hate that shit. I hate it with a passion. You don't like my French? I'm sorry. But I'm who I am. This ain't for kids. This channel has never been for kids. Get away, kids, you're bothering me. I ain't got time for you. Which, has its issues too. Campaigns, Chapter 8, existing campaigns, anything that, if you're not an experienced game master, you don't have your own ideas. Anything like this is always extra and helpful because it can give you ideas. Advancing a monster. Once again, what I've been preaching for decades that you can take your lower level critters and make them more potent. And here's yet another set of rules and mechanics to help you do that, and several different methods of doing it. And I highly recommend if you've never played around with adapting and modifying any kind of. I gotta watch that. Started to feel like I need to sneeze, and my nose acting like it's running a little bit. But I got to be careful. In the drier weather, I'm prone to nosebleeds. Ever since I was a teenager, I had my nose cauterized when I was a teenager, and that is never. If that is not an experience you've ever dealt with, I don't recommend it. Thank you, Mom. Is you over there clean? Is you over there clean? She's over there clean. Okay. I'm surprised she ain't climbed up over here. Because I was in here a little while ago and paid some attention to her. I come in 2 or 3 times a day when I can. When I'm working, it's a little harder to do. I try to get in here at least once. The wife's in and out of here often. What you can't see over here in the door a couple weekend back, this room gets much colder than the rest of the house, which I've never quite, the our bedroom is on the opposite side of this wall to my right, and it is the hottest room in the house. And so I suspect that the vent above is like a cold air intake vent, and that's the heat the heat blowing vents on the other side. And so one of these two vents, it doesn't put a lot of heat out, and that's unfortunate. And I keep meaning to get into the attic above and go all the way down to this end of the house to because sometimes one of the heat vents on the other end of the house got disconnected because the cats out in the garage climb up into the attic and bounce all over stuff up there, and I had to go up back in the fall and reattach that pipe up there and duct tape the bejesus out of it. Hence the room what duct tape originally was for anyway. Uh, so I got some vents like like heat register vents and cut some holes in the bottom of the door over here and put those vents in so that more warm air can get in the room. But it also opened up so Mama the cats can sit here on the table and stare out those little windows and watch the other cats in the hallway and vice versa, so they can actually communicate together without getting being because she gets picked on. Sissy and Cece pick on her when she's out in the other room, and since she's been in here by herself, she's doubled her weight and she's a lot more relaxed and she lets us handle her a lot more than she used to. And I think the downside is we have to measure her being in here by herself too much. I really don't like that concept because I know how detrimental solitary confinement can be to people. I know that firsthand. Templates. So chapter 10, reading templates, feral creatures, gelatinous creatures, ghost brutes, incarnate construct, insectile creatures, monstrous beasts, multi-headed creatures, mummified creatures, reptilian creatures, spectral creatures, symbiotic creatures, turiate creatures, umbral creatures, whites and winged creatures. Whites, I guess there aren't no whites creatures, huh? Right? That makes sense. A lot of stuff in here going on through. Got rituals. What is that? Multiple 10 points. Yai Tai characters. The type pyramid. Some creatures or types are easier to change than others. Some types, such as undead, cannot change with a few rare exceptions. As an aid to determine the type of a creature with a multiple template, we can arrange the types in the form of a pyramid. At the base of the pyramid are those types that can be changed most easily, top of the types that can be changed only rarely, if all. Right, and that makes sense because undead, generally speaking, form the way they are when they die. So a lot of their characteristics are carried over from their real life. So if you look at talking about exotic players playing exotic monster races and those characters die and they get raised as the undead, that would make them a unique type of undead. The same thing goes with a lot of the creatures and monsters. So if you somehow or another, a dragon dies and somehow gets resurrected as a dragon version of a ghast, which I can't imagine how that would work, but potentially it could, right? And that would make for a pretty nasty undead to deal with. Becoming a monster, the effects of transformation. So this is the actual rules, or some actual rules on what happens if your character gets transmuted. Now, there's a number of spells that we utilize quite a lot of change self, change others, physically make alterations so you can look like something you're not, etc., etc. There's also a handful of spells and effects that cause you to morph, literally change into something else. So you being a human that turned into a ogre because you got cursed by a hag or something, the rules before that were loose and up to interpretation, or mostly you were left to yourself. Having a means to be able to figure out how that might actually happen and some of the side effects and so on and forth of the process itself could be interesting. So, what if your character's cursed to turn into an ogre, except it's not instantaneous? Perhaps it happens over the course of a day or a week or a month. Each day, subtle changes. some are not so subtle. Imagine the growing pains that person would experience as it's their form expands into an ogre-sized form, which means that their muscle or in their body mass and more importantly their bone structure has to increase. How much pain and suffering would that involve? Personally, just curious kind of stuff, right? So we get into some appendixes, and what do the appendixes go? We got sample monster clan. Okay, anthropomorphic animals. New races, half ogres, and new monsters: the Desmadu, the Loxo, and the Turn. Oh, the Loxo. I I love the way these fellas look when I first saw them, and so I want to pop back here a couple. All right, the Desmond. I had a campaign where the characters were playing. I call it a dark campaign because it was dark themed and it was adult in nature. So there was a lot of things that would be considered not goodly going on, and the characters were of evil alignment, and that's what they all wanted to do. And part of them was they started out. Uh, I forget exactly how the party got together, but there was some kind of quest for something. I think it was uh, one had a thing of wanting some revenge. Somebody else wanted to recover something, and well, I just tied it all together. They were looking for a specific a bad guy, and eventually they settled in an underground underdark city that was. Kind of a hodgepodge of different races. It was a trading area, so no one power dominated the entire city. And one of the encounters they ran into was these fellows here, and these are generally good natured when it comes to. I mean, their alignments. They're not generally evil, by my understanding. Jesus, yeah, usually neutral good. And they had them inhabiting a cavern that the player characters were trying to get something from, and so they had to run into these guys a couple times. Now, this booger here, the Luxo, pops up in one of the other monster manuals somewhere else. I know damn well it does because I've used this race of individuals in a number of campaigns. They also gave me inspiration for a lot of the genobs in my would-be Interstellar Frontiers game. There are in Interstellar Frontiers. They come in three categories. You have human beings in all of our variety, but I consider purely human strength. Then you have actual aliens, so alien entities that may be humanoid and may not be, but they are distinctly different from humanity. And then the genomes. So humanity in the future that I envision has mastered genetic manipulation to the level that they've crafted numerous species of subhuman. Now I use the term sub, as a misnomer here. Not that they're lesser, but that they're different. So, for example, the primary characters that my friend Shannon ran for his house for about 6 years, enough so that him and I co-wrote what amounts to about three damn novels. Uh, the his characters were based off the aviaries. So in his makeup of his race, the aviaries were an experiment like a lot of other a lab experiment like a lot of others that got created. The reasonings weren't fully understood, but the lab at the time had created a whole slew of aviaries, so a whole lot of different human avian combinations. And then something came down, and there was going to the program was going to be shut down and eliminated. And so the backstory goes that the characters, uh, Flaytaber's ancestors, broke out of the uh, facility that they were being housed at and escaped with help from somebody in one of the scientists that turned out to become thousands of years later his the aviaries venerate this fella as the god of death. It's kind of ironic. Anyway, the idea being was that they were a cross between a human and an aviary with both traits. but the aviary traits were going to be predominant when it comes to like facial structures and body structure in the way of wings. So the average aviary is a much lighter humanoid. They're both medium. A human and an aviary are both medium sized, for example, but a human can't fly without mechanically assistance. Some aviaries can fly, some require assistance. Some aviaries, all of them have the facial beak structure, but they have the hands and torso body structure. Though the lower legs tend to mimic the avian or the avian genes as well. And one of the other things that came out from his campaign was there were so many variations. There was literally 100, and he actually created them somewhere, someplace. I got the 20 odd pages of handwritten and then later typed. This is probably the typed version that I got here somewhere of all the aviaries broken down. I've tried to include them in my Interstellar Frontiers game, and then I realized it's just a bloody chapter unto itself. And so I redacted them from the latest attempt at a final version with the intentions of giving them a mention, of course, but the more detailed aspect of them could be saved for a different book if it's ever warranted to have. But so the Loxo gave me the idea for the Rhino Man. So that and trying to think of that character from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that was a bad guy that was a rhino. Anyway, it was an interesting book to read, and I only paid $20 for it, I think, when I got it, so it was pretty cheap. Excellent condition, book wise. A lot of interesting information. Ironically, I should say, a lot of this in here, myself and others from the older generations had been doing similar stuff as homebrew for a long time. And if you think about that, that's how a lot of rule adaptations and changes for our role playing games come from, is from a lot of players conducting similar stuff and it getting back to the creators and the creators going, hey, that's a good idea. Anyway, I'm Rick. You're not. This is Savage Species playing monstrous characters. If you can get your hands on it, it's worth investing in, I think, in my opinion. If you're really into the creation stage and the possibilities of the endless possibilities of modifications, an excellent book to have. Otherwise, I don't know, right? I was glad to get it anyway. So, until next time, I'm you, you're me, and this is